8th. And members in the room are Amy Holloman, myself, Kelly Lessons. Member Carl Jacobs is online. And that might be it so far.
Yes, first school board member.
Great. Yep. And we have a variety of staff on hand, so we'll just dive right in with
I'm sorry?
the first item was an ISER update. So do we have our ISER guests admitted?
We have Dana.
Okay, can we let's let her in?
Okay.
All right, Dr. DeFeo, welcome.
Hi, good to see you. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Okay, pardon?
Yeah, we can hear you, and we'd love to hear from you. This is a request for an update on your work on teacher retention, and we heard from you last June of last year.
Yes, it's been a little while. Let me see if I can share the screen here. It says that I cannot share. I can certainly talk through what we're doing, but we did have some slides just to sort of give a project overview. They might be a helpful visual.
I'll make you a co-host.
Well, we're going to make you a co-host.
Okay. And I do understand that Matt Berman is to join us, but I don't see him yet in the list. So I sent him a text.
Okay.
Let me see if I can share. This will stop the other share screen. Is that all right?
Totally fine.
Okay. So I'm hopeful that you're able to just see a quick little PowerPoint.
Yes.
Okay. So hi, my name is Dana, and joining us soon, I'm sure, is Matt Berman, and he and I are both working on this project to understand what sufficient compensation for retention and equity looks like in the state of Alaska, really looking at teacher turnover and how compensation factors into our ability to attract and retain teachers in our high needs schools and in our hard to fill positions. So I see that I still have the June 14, 2022 date. That's what we started with. So I can kind of just run through as a quick overview of what we intend to do and where we are now. Would that be the best way to make use of the time, or would you like to start with questions?
I'd love to start with whatever you can share, initial findings or process and findings.
So we can share process. We are hoping to have findings very soon, but we don't have anything definitive yet. The way that we set up the project was to, as I said, really understand how compensation factors into retention. And because this was funded as the National Science Foundation Robert Noyce grant, we had to focus particularly on STEM teachers. That's the focus of the funder. But we, of course, care about all teachers in Alaska, and I think that it's worth asking, do STEM teachers behave or are their higher in turnover patterns different from other teachers? So by extension, we're going to look at all teachers, which I think will make the project much more useful. One of the things in particular we're going to look at with STEM teachers is whether or not they leave the classroom to take jobs in private industry. There's sort of a narrative that I've heard that they do that, but I don't know that anybody has really quantified the extent to which that happens, or what they get when they go to private industry. Do they get better pay? Do they get, what is the trends that we can see there? And also, what is our ability to attract teachers from industry or from the public sector and STEM fields into our classrooms? So I think the next slide here talks about our overall research plan, and we have done a lot of data cleaning and analysis and compilation so that we will be ready for our modeling, but we have not yet been able to run those models. So to your question that you'd love to know, some answers. So would I would really love to know some preliminary findings. We spent a lot of time securing permissions and access to data because we're going to be working with data from DEED, from Department of Labor, and then we started compiling a quantitative data set, which was all 54 districts' collective bargaining agreements for the last, I think we went back to, I would have to ask my colleague. I think we went back to 2008 on those, maybe even sooner. So we tried to identify all of the benefits and quantify those, which tricky. NEA was a huge help there. And what we've also done since we met with you last is compiled all of the administrative data for school district characteristics, community characteristics, and individual schools within each district. So that'll help us understand some of the working conditions from a variety of different points of view. And so right now, and I wish I had results, and I really do think that if we're able to come back in May, we will. We're able to start joining all of these big data sets that we've been building over the last couple of months and really start that quantitative analysis. So I'll stop there because I'm sure that that you probably wanted to hear an answer, and I don't have a great one, but I'll stop for any questions.
Matthew Berman is joined.
Oh, and Matthew Berman is joined?
Oh, he did?
I'm trying to promote him to.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Being promoted as a panelist. Member Jacobs, do you have any questions?
Yeah, sorry, Zoom wouldn't let me in.
No questions, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Not yet. Well, I guess I would like to flip to the end of the book and get to the answers, or get to the way the story closes. But I guess we'll just have to wait until, maybe our May meeting would be an appropriate time to get more of your initial findings. Do you have any, hypotheses or strong suspicions about anything?
Well, I think Matt's better prepared to talk about that because he's done some of the initial data joins looking at the Department of Labor data.
Okay.
Matt, just to update where we were, we just sort of said where we are with, I had sort of given an overview that we spent a lot of time planning and pulling together data sets and cleaning data sets, and that we're almost on the cusp of running these models but haven't yet done it. So that's all of the update I gave. And I know you've looked at some of the DOL stuff though, and might have some preliminary impressions.
Well, yes, thank you. Well, we did not actually try to, if you're talking about results in terms of, our initial results, our intent is to try to identify schools that seem to be outperforming their peers. And that's not something that we specifically looked at before and did not look at the Department of Labor data set. So the point is we have to be able to get a really good prediction of what makes, what we would expect, how we would expect a school to perform before we can identify schools that do better, that perform better than we would expect. And so our focus has been on trying to, get the data together to understand, how we could predict a school's performance. The factors that predict the school's performance are the ones that you would expect, like obviously schools that have that serve a higher percentage of children in need in Title I schools generally have more challenges to retain staff than those that are in more affluent school areas.
Yeah, can I follow up? So 24 hours ago, the governor outlined a potential path forward for the next 3 years of incentivizing direct payments to teachers between $5,000 and $15,000, depending on if, urban, rural, and I don't know what the third category was. Do you have any thoughts on whether that,
Yeah.
you just identified that there are differences between, schools that are higher need and lower need, that there might be differences in those working conditions. Do you have a sense of whether a $5,000 per teacher direct payment is going to be sufficient to incentivize teacher retention?
Well, I haven't seen the specifics of the bill, so I'm not sure whether the bonus is per district or per school. Obviously, for Anchorage, it makes a big difference. If it's per school,
it's per teacher. I think the idea was direct cash payments from the state to teachers.
yes, but
how I
that's if the
understood
teacher stays. What if the teacher stays in the district but moves to a different school? Do they still get the bonus?
That's an interesting question.
So that's the question for Anchorage, because in Anchorage, most of these teacher retention issues are teachers moving from school to school within the district. I mean, yes, some of them move to other districts, but see, it's more powerful if it's school tied to the school, and then it restricts the district's ability to reassign teachers as well. So I'm not sure how, it does depend on the details. But if it's about whether a $5,000 retention bonus is enough to keep a teacher who's working in Anchorage from moving to another school district, I'm not sure that we haven't gotten to that fine level of detail. The $15,000 bonus for rural schools, I would say, is probably not sufficient. At least for many of the smaller villages, that would not be sufficient, because the discrepancies that we've identified in our previous research are more like, in the $20,000 to $50,000 range rather than $15,000. Although it obviously would make a difference in some cases.
Wow. Okay.
And it's right. It's not a substitute for increasing the basic student allocation, which would enable districts to change all kinds of working conditions that might be relevant
to that bigger picture.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Member Holman.
I've got some questions, comments. And I don't know if there's a way to factor this into what you're looking at, but recently I spent a little bit of time getting to contemplate life in an airport waiting room. And I noticed there was an ad up on the TV from Kenai Peninsula saying that for in-state transfers, they could offer up to 12 years of experience on contract if you wanted to live on the road system, which made it seem like a pretty targeted ad to me. And I'm going to say, in my experience, while it is the case that sometimes people leave to go off the road system for dollars, they come back to the road system for convenience and everything that being on the road system offers. I can't recall ever seeing a school district go after rural teachers as a way to fill their ranks. And I don't know if there's a way for you to be aware of that or look at it. I'll say I first became aware about 14 years ago that ASD contract with teachers had a provision that they could not offer more than 5 years credit for experience. And I couldn't figure out why either side would bargain that into the contract, but it was ASD's push. I think in essence, so they wouldn't be compelled to recruit high dollar teachers from other places. It is a disincentive for experienced people to come into the district. I know it's been increased to 6 since that time, but to some degree, I think because of past history, districts in Alaska didn't compete, didn't want to compete. We relied on a stream of new teachers coming out of UAA or other places, mostly in the Northwest. And I don't know that we've completely changed our vision of the fact that there's no longer a stream of teachers coming out of those places to be hired. But I think those things are going to add a lot of distortion to any kind of picture you try to paint. If districts in Alaska really start going after each other's teachers. And I don't know if you've been aware of that or it's factored into what you're looking at. And that's my first non-question comment. I know there's not exactly a question there.
So our model is looking at transfer experience and what teachers are able to transfer within Alaska, and also how many years they're able to transfer from out of Alaska, which I think is an interesting component that, yeah, sorry.
I was going to say, it'd be good to know if that's changing. If you're
yes, that's very important information. I wasn't aware of it. I mean, we have information. There's information in the collective bargaining agreements that that do talk about the caps on the amount of experience that you can transfer in or use. And if this is coming from the district, it's probably I don't know. I presume it's not in the collective bargaining agreement. And so it's difficult for us to track those things. So anytime you see something, it's great to let us know because we can incorporate that. But again, I'm not, it's not something we've experienced before, so I couldn't predict what its effect might be.
I took a picture of it. I can send it to you.
Yeah,
Please. I can put my email in the chat here. Or the last slide has our emails.
Yeah.
The other comment I was going to make is it came up some years ago when I was president of the Anchorage Education Association. The district was having a really hard time filling spots at Mount Eliana, which was a school specifically for kids with severe emotional disorders. And the initial reaction was HR wanted to offer bonuses for teachers that would transfer there. AA has some issues with that because it creates the disparities in compensation. And in the long term, my personal feeling is that incentive doesn't always get the kind of person you really want going into that kind of environment. It just goes more, if you got someone in financial distress, they look at an incentive like that in a different way than someone that might want to work with those kids. And what we worked out with HR was a couple of conditions, like one, a guarantee that if things didn't work out, that teacher could transfer back out into a neighborhood school, that they would have a certain caseload that wouldn't be exceeded, and a couple of other things. And the result was we filled all the spots with conditions like that, non-monetary. And I firmly believe that in the long game, teachers go where they can succeed, where they feel successful. And I hope trying to analyze that is part of what you're looking at. And I know it's a really difficult thing to quantify and put data to, but anecdotally, if you know a lot of teachers in a district and you know the principals and you watch how teachers gravitate around certain individuals, that's a real driver to where people try to live and what they do. If they see a place where they have a high level of confidence, they're going to feel successful and happy at the end of the day. It drives retention. Good luck with that.
We have maybe just like 2 more minutes for the rest of the presentation, and then we're going to have to say we'll see you again in May. So maybe if you could walk us through the rest of your slides real quick.
Sure. There's not much more to say, although to the comment, and I'm sorry, I couldn't tell who was making it, that I think that we will be following up when we identify these schools that are performing well. We'll be doing some qualitative work, talking to people who work in those environments to try and figure out the things that our model isn't able to accommodate, but that really do matter in those teacher decisions. So that's phase 2 is sort of the brown or whatever color this is here on the slide. That brown part will be to try to dive into some of the things that the last comment was noting. We had just indicated that we were going to gather some variables, looking at individual teacher characteristics, looking at the school characteristics and community characteristics, and we're going to look at what those teachers do. I know there's a lot on this slide, but I'm just going to move on, and I can certainly email it to you if you would like to take a closer look. But here we are in our timeline. We're actually, pretty close to being on time and to having some of the preliminary results that we had hoped for when we proposed the project. So we're moving our way down those steps, and would love to talk to you in May, and we can stay in touch when we have those results. So we absolutely appreciate updates or things that you see that are happening on the ground that might not be reflected in the official documents that we're reading. So we ask that you stay in touch with us when you have ideas or thoughts or anything. And this is how you can do that. Our phone numbers, our email. The easiest way to find us is probably to go to the ISER website and just find our pictures. But however you like, we will be in touch, and certainly appreciate when you can help alert us to things that might affect the way that we're doing the work.
Fabulous. We'll continue to be in touch, and look forward to your return in May.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time. And if you could just email me maybe the slides from today,
when you think about the operation of the day, it's a big operation. Every day they have to feed thousands of kids, and they have to do it, 250 days a year, and they can't miss a day. You can't say, I forgot. And if they miss one day, that's what will hit the paper. It won't be the successful 249 days. So it's a big operation over there. So we wanted to thank Bob and his staff and Marcy for their help. We had 9 findings in connection with this audit, and management was responsive to the findings and recommendations. So for time's sake, we'll just turn to page 2. The introduction is just the introduction. And on page 2, we have our first finding where we had the food warehouse, including the freezer section, was not properly organized and maintained. Food items were stored in numerous locations and in aisles, making it difficult to find items. Moving on to finding number 2 on page 3, we had the warehouse location field in Primera Edge. Primera Edge is a software that they use to track their inventory. It's not used to record where items were located. And without those specific accurate warehouse locations, retrieving items from the warehouse was inefficient and resulted in items being stored in multiple locations. Our third finding on page 4, we found that the user privileges for Primera Edge, in other words, people who can go into the software, did not always appear reasonable and necessary. As a business practice, usually you try to promote internal control by only allowing essential personnel to have access and ability to adjust and receive inventory. We found that 28 of 34 users at the student nutrition warehouse had access to update the inventory in Primera Edge. 26 of 34 users had access to update the orders category. So we're recommending that you limit the access of who has access to Primera Edge to make those adjustments. Finding 4 on page 5, we found that the inventory adjustment process used by the staff resulted in questionable adjustments. These adjustments were not always supported by adequate explanations such as who made the adjustment and why the adjustment was necessary. On page 6, under 5, we found that on-hand inventory balances in Primera Edge were not accurate. Our sample inventory revealed differences between our physical count and Primera Edge records. We gave some examples in the table below. Primera Edge recorded 450 chicken strips. We counted 441, discrepancy of volume. Sometimes it was over, sometimes it was short. And then on page 6, or the next page, page 7, we found also that there were discrepancies noted in the inventory totals calculated by student nutrition warehouse staff. They did an inventory, and when they did their inventory, they wrote the numbers that they found. They counted something on a shelf and wrote it down on a notebook, kind of like your yellow pad right there, and wrote it down. And then walking through, they'd find it somewhere else, another 30 boxes, and write it down. Maybe on the next page, write down another 30 boxes on the next page. But when those were added up, sometimes some items were missed when they added up. You can see where what was recorded, entered into the Primera Edge from the notepad and what we counted on the notepad. So there were differences, meaning that the inventory that was entered into Primera Edge for the adjustments wasn't accurate. Page 8 and 6, there's a student nutrition warehouse item status report, and it showed 72 of 312 items, and 23% of the active items had negative balances, with 38 of those items having negative balances in the hundreds. For example, flour tortillas were reported having negative balance of 548 units. Yet we found 282 units in the freezer. Finding 7 on page 10. The best by dates were not used to manage the items stored in the warehouse. Since these dates were not entered in Primera Edge inventory records, there was no reliable way for staff to locate the products and what should be used first. Now, I should make a note on the very next sentence. It should be noted that Best By dates does not mean that the food had expired. They weren't giving out expired food to the kid. It was Best By. There's a difference. Number 8. In 2021, they started using Primera Edge. This is on page 11. Primera Edge is a new software to account for inventory. But there weren't any operating procedures that were updated for the use of the new software. And having proper procedures so that everyone's on the same page. That's just another control. And then on page 9, the last finding, we found that security at the warehouse had improved, but there were still some things that could be done to help prevent unauthorized access. Student nutrition warehouse security had been improved since the last audit with implementation of work batch access. Most of the doors coming in and out of the warehouse. However, food service staff and anyone else entering from the food preparation area had unrestricted warehouse access. In other words, there's no front counter, so to speak, where you say, okay, no one can come by this front counter unless I tell you you can come by this front counter. Right. The way their operations are set up. So it had improved, but there could be further improvements. That's what we have on this audit. Jim, did you want to add anything about?
Well, I'm pretty familiar with how the operation should operate and does operate, and we're going to spend some time. Mike and I talked a lot. Well, all of us
we did.
You know, a lot of these issues, we really need to figure out what can Primera Edge do, and how can we use automated technology for inventory, because there's problems with the way the system is currently set up, but it could be that we set it up the way that OneSource and PCS were set up, and that Primera Edge actually can be set up differently. For instance, you could have 5 kinds of canned corn, but you could never put each of those separate canned corn on the same rack because the old system wouldn't let you. Everything had its own SKU, and you couldn't put 5 different types of things in one area, which is why they never did the inventory thing the way that a normal auto parts dealer would do. All they care is that it's a Ford starter. They don't care that it's a Ford starter made in Indiana versus Ohio. And that's how the old system worked, but we've got to dig into the new system and find that out. So there's a lot of efficiencies. We all agreed on everything that she found. I mean, everything you found was, you're absolutely correct. Now we need to go dig into this newer system and find out, did we just set it up because the old way couldn't do a lot of these things, but maybe we can now? So we have some work to do.
And could I add something? This audit, I think, came at a really, really good time because it was a recent change in management with Marcy starting in the fall of last year, I think.
Yeah.
And I think this gave her a good perspective on what I call the business side of operations. So I think this came at a really good time for her, so she could give her something to work with, because I think they were good things for her to realize what was going on in her warehouse.
And some of this stuff, as you look through it, it would be long discussions that I don't have time today. Like, why would you do a pick ticket on a Friday before you receive the fresh fruit and vegetables on Monday? Because you have no choice. Otherwise, the pick ticket won't be available for the drivers come Monday morning, where the fruit is literally coming in 10 minutes before they put it on their truck. And so you're always going to have negatives, but it shouldn't be every day of the week, and it should be specific things. So some of the things that look wrong, there's actually very legitimate reasons why you prep for Monday's deliveries, even though you haven't received Monday's stuff. And so so a lot of this stuff you really would want to walk through the warehouse and see why, because some of it can't be avoided. Some of it's inventory control.
Some of it's inventory control. Some can be avoided, some can't be avoided.
So it's complicated, but I do know that we need to find out, can Primera Edge be set up differently? And I think everyone agrees with it.
Hey, Jim, this is Bob Schwartz. I joined.
Hey, Bob, yeah, go ahead.
So, do you have any questions, Jim, that I can answer for you on this, or?
I think we're good. I think after we look at the automated technology possibilities for where we put stuff in inventory for inventory control, I think it's more coming back in about a few months saying, okay, this is the improvements we've been able to make.
So you want to circle back like you?
Well, we don't know how long it's going to take until, I mean, I'll have next week to be able to go over to student nutrition and talk while people are a little bit less hectic. But we'll come up with a plan as we always do with audits. And we'll come back with showing the improvements, and finance meetings as good as any to be able to show that later in this year.
I mean, these all look like things that happen over time and, you know, like stopping with a big fresh look.
Well, I know the history of a lot of this stuff that goes back, you know, 7+ years, and so Bob certainly does. We are the right people. It's whether what would be standard best practice for an auto parts store can even be done with food. And that's where the challenge is. Early on in the recommendation or the findings, he put first in, first out on one of them, first, second, and third. That was still in there, but food is never first in, first out. It's always when is it gonna expire first? Because Bob receives USDA food that's gonna be Best Buy in 30 days versus something that he may have received 6 months ago that's gonna be Best Buy in 3 years. So you got to look at Best Buy or Best Buy, not BUY, but Buy, BY. And I thought you guys did it. I mean, we worked through it. There were multiple drafts. So yeah, I mean, it can be improved, and we've got a little work to do.
Well, I appreciate the work on the audit, and I'm very impressed by just the scale of the day-to-day work of I toured the warehouse a while ago, and
It's a big operation.
It's enormous. It's the biggest food warehouse in the state of Alaska, I think.
Oh, I'm sure it is.
I mean, it's extraordinary. I mean, I think about just trying to keep my own kitchen like covered and organized.
Food services.
And then it's done on the scale of the district.
Yeah.
So-
Feeding
I've got to go
thousands
this way.
every day. And you've got food coming in and out every day.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, an auto parts store, it was busy.
But at least the parts don't expire.
The parts don't expire. I don't think they
Nobody ever got sick on the bed with children.
Right, vintage is a nice auto parts store, maybe the
They
year.
do a tremendous job out there to feed
Yeah.
that many children every single day without fail.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. So I appreciate the findings, and I appreciate the responsiveness, and happy to circle back in a couple of months to.
And can I say one other
Yes.
thing? Just to let you know where we're at right now on a current audit.
Yes.
Previously, you had asked for an audit of fixed assets.
Mhm.
And we started that audit about a month and a half ago. We're doing, audit work is divided up into 3 phases generally. First phase is called preliminary survey, where you go out, pretend you know absolutely nothing, and say, please teach me about what you do and how this works. After talking with people, looking at some data, you know you have limited time, limited resources. So you say, okay, we've talked to all these people, we've looked at all these things. These are the things that we're gonna focus in on. A, B, and C. And that's called field work. And then after field work, you do the report writing. So right now we're kind of right in between preliminary survey and field work, where we're saying, okay, this is the things we learned. Now we're gonna put together what's called an audit plan. And this is how we're gonna do our field work. So Meredith is now starting to look at the audit plan, saying, okay, here's where we'd like to focus on. So I just want to give you an update on the fixed assets. So, but thank you for your support.
Thank you, and thank you for the boots on the ground. Work to count everything. Make sure it's all accounted for.
Probably know more about chicken strips than you ever want.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Let's pivot to the third item on the agenda, which is review assembly ordinances for taxes.
Right. Okay, so probably won't spend a whole lot of time on this. We did go through this, or a lot of the information when we did the presentation at the joint school board assembly meeting. So a lot of the information you see on here is going to be duplicative there. This is the ordinance. It really is just really high level, asking for our fiscal year tax request as well as our upper limit spending approval. The same as on the charts that we showed on Friday. Is there any questions on the ordinance? This is what they'll be. It went for automatic introduction, I guess, last night, although it wasn't technically on the agenda. It was automatically introduced, and it'll be for the public hearing on the 21st.
Okay, at that meeting.
Yes.
Okay, and there will be ASD staff on hand.
I will be there.
Okay.
If anyone else from the board wants to show up, then that's
I think
great.
we have a meeting that night.
I think ours is Monday.
Oh, Monday. Okay, all right.
Awesome.
See it too. Where my other document went. Find it. So the memo contains most of the information that we have, or the, I guess, more valuable information, more detailed that we have as far as what that ordinance goes into. The $905 million proposed budget that we have, again, it does include that increase in capital projects for the amount that we put into school safety and secure vestibules from the school bond debt reimbursement. But we did want to spend a lot of time, or quite a bit of time, talking about the proposed tax increase, because that was one of the, that's what you get questions about. That's what I get questions about, is why my tax is increasing, but the district needs more money. So I'm just trying to put that into perspective here, where, we're required to pay $7.8 million more. However, the state takes that money away from us, so we don't see any actual increase. So we have that, and then we separated out between calendar years and fiscal years, because they are separate based on what the tax request is going to be. We don't have an estimated assessed valuation, so if that goes up, then that mill rate will go down a little bit, but the same the same tax request will be there. The other thing I mentioned too is if we do get increased state money, the timing on this is such that we cannot collect any sort of additional local contribution above what we've asked for once that tax rate is set. Mm-hmm. So if the state does give us additional money that we could potentially increase what's allowable, we can't collect that. And it makes it difficult when they give us one-time money, because we can't plan for it the next year. Like this year, they gave us $16 million or so towards the end of the year, but we'd already got our tax request, so we couldn't get that additional contribution on that $16 million.
So that's one of the outcomes when they only do one-time funding versus an actual change to that ESA.
Yeah.
Tell me if I'm wrong, but I thought I understood that the city is actually collecting more money on behalf of ASD than they can give to us under the state's formula.
So the city has just one citywide tax cap, and the city can collect up to this amount that includes, escalators for population change and inflation and new construction. So whatever the district doesn't ask for, the city can takes what's left. If there's additional headroom in their upper limit, then they can, or the upper limit, or not the upper limit, but within the municipal tax cap, they can ask up to that amount whether the district can take it or not.
Gotcha.
So typically it's been about a 50-50 split, but in recent years it's kind of ebbed towards the municipality getting more of it by virtue of not being able to increase a lot of that additional local contribution. But this year we are going to ask for a little bit more than what we calculate as a district tax cap. Mm-hmm. So in our budget in the back, we do have like a tax section that calculates out our district tax cap, and it's $200,000 million more than what was what was actually limited by if we calculated it just for the district. Understanding the district or the city's budget, I think, did have headroom underneath. They were under the tax cap when the mayor submitted his budget, and I think still under after the assembly approved it.
So when we get our property tax statements and they apportion out what's going to ASD, they're showing the actual amount that's going to ASD.
Right, and that also included the unfunded bond debt. So in the last several years, we have asked for that additional appropriation to fund what's been cut out of the school bond debt reimbursement, which for This last calendar year, 22, included about a little over $20 million of additional taxes requested for that. So that'll be going away. And you can kind of see that here on this chart, where you'll have an effective decrease in the mill rate because you have that $20 million going away.
Yeah. And what I'm sort of working my way around to is if there is a significant BSA increase, which would increase the amount we could get from the municipality, that would come out of, if they funded that, it would come out of money they've already anticipated spending on other things.
If we were to request an increase in that additional allowable contribution, yeah, the city would have to make it work within the total pot of money that they can get. So they would have to lower their expenses. Likely what would happen is we would just stay under what the state cap is and then try to build up to, over time, request what we can, work with the city to try to get those additional allowable contributions up.
And our knowledge of the BSA increase will probably come after it's too late to make the request to the municipality in time anyway.
For this year, yeah.
So we'd be looking at FY25.
But the BSA increase in codified statute, that'll be our projections going forward, and that's what we'll base our assumptions on for 25.
I try to get this as straight as I can because explaining it at like a community council meeting is so much fun.
Yes. Right, yeah. So, you see our tax increase of, $6.8 million request for the fiscal year. However, the calendar year tax request is $4 million because it's split over the two fiscal years. So for our 2023 calendar year request, that'll take into consideration the last half of this fiscal year and the first half of next fiscal year when we're trying to when we're setting those effective tax rates and mill rates.
Thank you. Any questions online? Member Jacobs, you good?
I'm not sure if I can see hands on this particular screen. I don't see anything right now.
Okay,
No questions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, great. Okay.
Right. We move on to our fund balance projections. Not a whole lot of significant change from what we presented back in, I believe it was beginning of December was the last time we gave you guys an update on our fund balance. Just going through some of the high level things. Interest earnings went up quite a bit just based on some recent activity. As that federal funds rate increases rapidly, so does our interest earnings on our more cash holdings. We still have the mark-to-market adjustments. Like in January, we lost about $1 million, or we gained about $1 million in January on our mark-to-market approach, and then in February we lost about $1 million. So it's overall though we do expect to be above what we'd actually projected, so that's good. But however, we still do run that risk of if there is a market reset or something, that our investments that are in that mark-to-market type assets will be adjusted downward. So hopefully not, but it's always a possibility. Right now we are projecting it to be above what we budgeted. Other local revenues, you see that as a negative 2.5 million. That's largely because of the almost 9 million that we included in fund balance. We don't book that as an actual revenue source. It's just a budgeted item. So you'll see a negative.
That was part of like our $29 million draw on the fund balance?
No, this was a different one that we had a board memo go through that adjusted the budget, and I believe it was to accommodate some spending. I want to say it's how we had to do the ARC mechanism, but I have to go back and check. Or maybe it was a capital project thing. But we did do a revision to the budget this year that increased expenditures and rely on fund balance to take that draw. So the next year, yeah, you'll see the $45 million negative in that area too, or somewhere about that.
Because of how much we're relying on the fund balance.
Right, yeah. Okay, yeah, it's really just because we can't count it as an actual revenue source, just on the budget side. It'll always show negative if we use fund balance.
Okay.
The increase in state foundation funding is the 16.1 or 2 million that we got in the one-time funds from this year that we saved, plus about $3 million in additional funding received on, I believe it was mostly correspondence and intensive needs students that were increased. Federal impact aid going down a little bit from what we projected, pretty consistent with presented last time. And then Medicaid and ROTC funding is about pretty close to what we budgeted. That emergency connectivity fund, if you recall, that was money we received from hardware purchases that we bought. Like we bought all these Chromebooks. We ended up transferring the cost of those into the general fund. Some of those were bought with ISER money, but we shuffled some stuff around so they'd be purchased with general fund money, so we could get reimbursement on the federal program for connectivity. I believe we have some more connectivity coming through that we're going to get reimbursed for too. And that might have been that memo that was on non-action last night. So overall, about 18.5 million to the good for revenues. On expenditure side, you know, the big outliers here you're going to see is the teachers' assistants, which I need to change to paraprofessionals. If Sandy's watching, apologize. Every time we have this in like several different places, and every time we'll find one, Sandy likes to
whack you over the head.
So I'll get that one changed. I think she probably mentioned it last time I presented this also. But that line, the substitutes and those certificated teachers are all kind of tied together. So while you see that substitute line being $7 million over budget, almost $9 million under on certificated. So it's really just kind of a swap for, because we can't hire these folks, we're having a lot more substitute costs in there. And it's both for teachers' assistants and for on the certificated teachers or paraprofessionals, sorry. But aside from that, the other ones are fairly in line with what we projected before. That attrition number did go up. There was we ended up having to fund Family Partnership had a substantial increase in their enrollment. And when we did the charter school adjustments, we needed budget authority to take out of, so we ended up increasing that attrition line item because we had all those vacancies. But that was the only thing it was for, is for that for Family Partnerships revenue adjustment based on their OASIS count. Medical benefits, those typically are still low, running well under budget due to, one, the number of vacancies we've had district-wide, turnover, and the number of people waiving medical insurance, which about district-wide is around 900, not necessarily all in the general fund, but that's a lot of people to waive insurance, and we don't spend that money. The PERS and TERS and other benefits largely track our what we see in salary attrition as well. So as we save money on, as we can't hire or we have vacancies, we also save money on those kind of associated benefits. Most of the other ones are tracking pretty well in line with what we had discussed last time. Utilities, about 1.8 million under budget. The big kind of outlier on this is that unallocated account. You see about a negative 1.4 million. So, and that's really intended to capture the amount of charter school money that is, by and large, most of this is sitting in charter schools as kind of their carry forward funding. But as charter schools also have problems staffing and have money saved at the end of the year, we're just anticipating that there's going to be an increase in that unallocated account. So just to make sure we separate that money out and reserve it elsewhere, so it's not looking like that it's spendable money, I guess. So we have about $2.5 million or so of projected unspent charter school money that's going to roll into our unallocated accounts. The last kind of outlier here is the $2.4 million in other expenditures. This is going to be almost all of the 2.3 million for the SROs that we didn't have to spend this year. So really we may end up getting to a spot where, you know, if we have enough fund balance in another area, or we're projecting our fund balance to be increasing, we may pull from that just for budget authority purposes, where like if we need to go out and fix some of these roofs at the libraries, we may have some emergency things. We need that budget authority. Of course, if it's over 200,000, we'll go through the board approval process, but you might see some things coming out of there just by virtue of that's where we have that upper limit authority sitting at the moment. But no, we plan to keep it above what we discussed earlier and keep it above that 8% board minimum. So that gets kind of the last section of it, and we'll get down to the, something happened. Anyway, this shouldn't be 1.26. It should have been, let me see if I have a better version of this. Then we'll show one. Made some adjustments before meeting this one. Here we go. So we originally projected about 28 million after we took out the 16 million in one-time funds. We're up to about 30 million. So it is increasing slowly. Whenever we do our initial projection, when we've only had school a few months, we're generally fairly conservative on what we expect to happen. So if we think something bad can happen, we generally throw it in there as it will happen. And then as we get further into the year and know more, then we'll kind of loosen up those projections a little bit. And so typically you'll see our fund balances projection go up slightly as the year goes on, which is from a management perspective and probably from your perspective, better than it going down. So we'll probably continue our practice of being fairly conservative when we're doing our projections, and just to be able to not get into a situation where we're coming back and saying, oh, we're out of money. So that is the projections. If there's any questions on that.
Sorry, I'm crossing this off. So that's 16, 10, and 36 at the moment.
And what I went in to fix was this 16 million here to add the 28 that we were going to spend, so it shuffles around the unassigned and the subsequent years. But apparently I did something wrong.
Got it. Any questions?
Do you know a total of one-time funds that we're spending on next year's budget?
About 65 million, 45 million in fund balance and about $20 million in ARP money.
Sorry, what?
ARP, the remaining ISER stimulus money.
Right, and that's part of that 45 from fund balance, though, is that 16 million.
Yes.
Say from the state that sort of moved diagonally, or moved laterally.
Yep, we didn't spend that this year. We just decided to hold it over to help next year's deficit.
The funding did stay flat. So obviously that money wouldn't be there. And we have inflation, say, at 3%. That's a reasonable guess for this coming year.
It's hard to predict with for FY25. It's pretty hard to predict because we have some significant contracts to be settled between now and then. Clearly, all of them.
Assuming everybody goes for zeros, do you know whatever?
Well, that makes it a little easier.
What kind of deficit we'd be looking at?
Yeah, if you look at, we assumed around a 3% escalation also, and that gets you to around $85 million, which is the 65 million plus the 3% inflation on the remaining 600 million and change budget.
In talking with legislators this morning, was suggested that if we can paint a picture of starting to look beyond this coming year.
I think page 13 in the budget book has a pretty dire forward look at the next 3 years. And it's the one that ends in the FY27 with us calling 1,200 positions.
Yeah, by the end of that time.
Yeah.
Right, yeah, and if you're looking at, what services we might have to reduce between now and then, we can kind of lay out what that could look like, but I don't want to be too specific because obviously that'll cause some unnecessary angst amongst our employees. That's kind of the fine line we need to walk is we don't want to stress out our folks any more than they already are with kind of just these broad assumptions.
Member Jacobs, your hand is large and yellow. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So to Member Holloman's point, and I think kind of the discussion being had right now, I appreciate, and I think similar comments were made about a year ago and 2 years ago. The need to balance informing the public and not in keeping as much worry as we can out of the classroom. I think the scales are probably tipping towards being more informative right now, as the public and lawmakers especially don't seem. I don't think that we're grasping what it looks like in FY25 if we do see no meaningful legislation passed related to the BSA. The testimony at our meeting last night was heartbreaking, and I continually was going over how much worse it could have been had we not appropriated that $65 million. And frankly, there are some legislators that have taken ASD to task over that allocation. And so I think there's a disconnect there that needs to be filled. To be blunt, I think we need to hold a work session at the earliest possible opportunity, and in broad terms, at least, discuss that potential $85 million deficit, how we got there, and broadly speaking, look at the puzzle pieces that we would have available to us to bridge that gap for FY25. I think it's information folks deserve to know, and we should be transparent about that before the legislative session wraps up. I don't want to be discussing that in the fall when there isn't concrete action that can be taken. And so that's my ask. I would hope that that's not controversial. That just seems to be good and transparent policy. Thank you.
I think that's a great plan for a work session, and I hope that Board President Bellamy can work with the administration to get that scheduled sooner rather than later. I did want to take the last 2 minutes to pivot to our last piece on the agenda, which is key legislation status review. And I see there's a very nice printout, but I'd maybe like to just, since we're talking about FY25, there was an article I took in the ADN about a revision to SB 52, which may be coming out today. Maybe it has come out.
It did come out a couple hours ago.
Okay.
Yeah. I did get to see a copy of that. That had the 1,000, I believe it had the, sorry, find it.
Can you just give us a brief overview?
Yeah. What the revision was is it added, I believe, it had the $1,000 increase the first year. It added an increase for the second year and then an inflationary component afterwards. So that was very positive news to see that inflationary adjustment going forward. That would make creating long-term instructional and financial plans considerably easier if we know that we're going to have we can staff our schools and resource our facilities the same as what we are doing currently, rather than even if you get one big BSA increase one year, the next year you're going back into this kind of cut mode because of inflation. So really positive to see that there is a inflationary component being talked about to attach to the SA.
Okay, so that's so great. So there is wording about an inflationary component moving forward. So it's not just a one-time fund for FY24 and 25, but it actually is built into.
Yeah, it seemed to be a reset over the 2 years, and let me see if I can. The committee substitute bill. Let's see if I can.
I guess while you're looking, can I ask whether the scale of the FY25, do we have a sense of whether that would meet our needs? I mean, if we're looking at an $85 million deficit, and this is maybe a $347 million cost to the state for that year, I mean, do we take a third of it? Not quite a third of it? I know you have a formula for how much we would.
Yeah, I have to go kind of model that out, because it's also going to be based on what those contracts settle at and what our actual inflationary rates are going to tie to, but here's the language that they have. So it would be $1,000 increase in which one this would be FY24, and then another, it looks like $348.
Yeah.
Second year, and then inflation adjusted after that. And that's that section down here.
Awesome.
But yeah, we have to model that out and see. I believe it probably would shore up our needs, and if nothing else, you could at least have that to plan on and then not rely so much on the use of your one-time funds this year and kind of stagger those in. So as you kind of phase in any changes you might have.
Okay. Well, something I think I'd like to explore is some kind of a memorandum of support. I know that we just sent something from the Assembly and Board to the co-sponsors of House Bill 65. And I think it'd be great to send a similar letter of support to the Senate Education Committee, either from the Finance Committee itself or from the board as a whole. So I will coordinate with President Bellamy and Vice President Jacobs on that. What would be the most appropriate thing, because I would like to signal ASD strong support and how it would meet our needs. So
I certainly support.
Okay, great. If you support it, then that seems like a good place to
I have to read the rest of it.
Thank you for that update. Any last questions? We're a couple minutes over. Member Jacobs or Holloman?
Good.
No. Okay. Well, with that, I think we finished in a pretty timely fashion, and we'll move to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
I'll second. All right. Thank you for joining us online and in the room. And thank you for supporting the event.